The first order of business when doing color correction is to adjust tonality, that is brightness and contrast. And you do that because after you adjust tonality, lots of times any kind of color issues that you thought you had magically go away. And my tool of choice to adjust tonality is the Luma Curve effect. So I'm going to show you how to use the Luma Curve effect in a number of different tonality situations in this video. To follow along, go to Working Files and go to Premiere Pro Projects and then go over to Luma Curve. We have a bunch of different video clips here with a bunch of different tonality situations, and we're going to work on all of them. So the first thing we want to do is to apply the Luma Curve effect to all of the clips. And if you don't know this little shortcut, I think you're going to find this helpful. I want you to first select all the clips. So you do that by marquee selecting them by clicking, let's say, above the upper left-hand one there, and dragging a marquee over all of them like that. Then going over to Effects. And if you've got your own custom color correction effect folder here, then go to that. Otherwise, go to Video Effects, Color Correction, and simply double-click on Luma Curve or drag it down to one of them like that. So I'll just double-click on Luma Curve, and that applies it to all of these clips. I'll close this down here, go back to Effect Controls. I'll select one of these by just clicking away, and then clicking on one of them to select it and hovering over that like that. I want to expand the view of the Luma waveform here, so I'm going to close down this little timeline here by clicking on this little disclosure triangle. Close that down. Now I have limited real estate here because of the resolution that we work in here, but you might want to expand the view of this a bit by dragging this to the right. That makes it larger, you see. Gives you more control over it like that. I'm going to pull this down a bit too to make the waveform monitor a little bit larger here by pulling that down like that. And I'm going to pull it to the right a little bit like this so we have a little bit more room. I'm more interested in the waveform than I am in the view here inside the program monitor. All right, this first clip is overexposed, and you can see it's overexposed because there are no blacks here. There are no shadows down here touching the 0 IRE line. And you've got a bunch of highlights here, some white areas that are above 100 IRE. These are super whites. They're pure white. There's no detail there, but you can make detail there by bringing them down. Now, again, if you're working in PAL, you're going to go from 1.0 here, 1.0 volts, down to 0.3 here. So you work from 0.3 to 1.0, and here in NTSC, we go from 0 to 100. All right, so the first order of business when working with tonality is to adjust the blacks or the shadows. And we do that here in the Luma Curve effect by dragging this little point down here in the lower left-hand corner. Now, it works pretty logically. If I drag it up, that's going to lift the blacks up. If I drag it to the right, that'll pull them down. And I want to pull them down so that the darkest area here, which is right about there, so it's probably right around here inside this clip, touches the 0 line, touches the 0 IRE line. So I'm going to drag it to the right until it touches it, like so. Like that. Now, it's a little bit difficult to get that point exactly right. That's one minor drawback to Luma Curve. It's not a precise tool. You just drag things around. But it works pretty well. I think you can see that. I want to pull it a little bit farther to the right here, just so it's touching the 0 line there. Okay. Now I want to adjust the highlights. All of this stuff up here, which is probably all these clouds here, is pure white, meaning there's no detail there. But there's detail available if we pull that down. So we take the point in the upper right-hand corner here, and we want to pull that down. If we go left, it goes up. Down goes down, as you'd expect. Just have the brightest areas touch the 100 line, so we know that we've got some pure whites here, but not much. The rest of the stuff is now detail. We've made the clouds have detail now. If I turn the effect off for a second, they go all white to now having detail, which is really cool that you have this opportunity to sort of resurrect your highlights and make sure you have detail inside them. And we could call it a day here, but we might want to adjust the overall brightness. And you do that by adjusting the midtones. And to adjust the midtones, you simply add a point here by clicking anywhere in the line that adds a point. Now notice when I added the point, things kind of shifted because when you add a point, it also sort of drags things around. That's part of this sort of lack of precision here. I can take this point and drag it anywhere I want and adjust things like that. I want to put it more or less in the middle, so I adjust the midtones. I can pull it up, making everything brighter. Or I can pull it down, making them a little bit darker. I'll leave it like that now. The final thing we can do is to adjust contrast, and we do that by adding 2 more points. And I'll save that for some later clips here as we go forward here. Let's move forward, go to here. This is obviously underexposed. I'll click on the clip to select it to see it inside the Effect Controls panel. Now we're not going to make this clip look as good as this one. It just can't be done. This thing is so seriously underexposed that it really can't be completely fixed, but we can do some fixing to it. You see these traces down here. That indicates that all of this stuff is super black. It's pure black, no detail. But we can resurrect some detail there. But because it's compressed so much, because I underexposed this so much, it's hard to get much detail there. But the first order of business, again, is to adjust the shadows. So I take this point here and lift up the shadows now to bring them up to the 0 line, like so. And we fix that. Now we want to take the highlights and lift them up as well. The highlights now are just touching the 60 line here. We want to bring them up to 100. So drag these to the left to bring them up. And there we have it, right about like there. All right, we can fix this a little bit. We can adjust this area of tonality down here very specifically by working inside the curves here, which is one great advantage to working with the Luma curve. You can select areas of tonality and work on them specifically. You do that by adding a number of points so that you can limit what goes on up here. So I'm going to click a point here, another point like that, another point like that. Now I can make sure that I don't mess things too much around up on top there, but I can adjust this guy here, taking this point down there, this third point here, and moving it to the left a little bit. That brightens it up. And notice how it sort of spreads out the bottom without spreading out too much of the rest of the stuff. There we go. We can brighten the dark areas a little bit, but we have to be careful not to go too far. It gets really bizarre looking like that. So just bring it a little bit like that. We can sort of get more detail here in the dark areas. All right, let's move on down to this next clip. This is the one that I purposely set up by applying the Luma curve effect it and then exporting it. We have a little bit too much black and a little bit too much white. You probably won't see this coming out of a camera, but let me show you how to fix this. We want to lift up the blacks and pull down the highlights. I'm going to take this thing and lift up the blacks a little bit like that, so they just touch the 0 line, and pull down the highlights like that, so they touch the 100 line. And what we've done now is we've reduced the contrast. The slope of this line now is not as steep as it was before, so the contrast looks a little duller now. If we want to fix the contrast, we can do that by adding a couple of points. So I'm going to click over here to add a point, and click over here to add a point. And I want to make this line a little steeper between those 2 points. So I can't make it steeper between the outer points because that would make it too bright and too dark again. But I can adjust these inner points a little bit. So I'm going to pull down the dark areas here right around there. The point is relative to the dark areas there. I'm going to pull them down just a little bit, make them darker but not black. I'm going to take these highlights right there, which is where this point is, lift them up a little bit and make them a little bit brighter. That makes this slope a little bit steeper, which adds some contrast to this, which makes it pop a little bit better. I can adjust the overall brightness by adding another point like so, and dragging that up or down. This is more to taste than something you can calculate or view inside the waveform monitor and decide that's right or wrong. This is really your eyeball telling you what the right brightness is there. Okay, let's go on down the line a little bit farther here. This one's properly exposed. So you see that we've got a little bit of black down there in the bottom. The shadows touch the 0 line, and the highlights just touch the 100 line. So we're pretty much set here. So at this point, you decide what will the overall brightness be, and what will the contrast be. So I can click over here in the middle, work on the midtones. I can lift it up a little bit, make it brighter. This really is to taste. I can make it a little bit darker. Making it darker looks a little richer, a little more intensity. If I want to add some contrast, I add this point here in the top to make the highlight areas, not the top highlight, but the general area here below the brightest areas, and make them a little bit brighter like that. I can add a point down here to make the dark areas here, areas right there in this chart, pull them down just a little bit. And that adds a little bit of contrast. That makes this little line a little bit steeper, which makes the image richer looking, but some people might find that a little bit maybe too contrasty. But again, that's just to taste. We adjust the mid-tone like that to just overall brightness while retaining the contrast there. Okay, moving on down the line here. We have a number of lights here that are above 100. I want to affect only the lights. These blacks down here are fine, but I want to affect only the lights, nothing else. I don't want the rest of the stuff to change, which is something you can do when you work with the Luma curve. So I'm going to add some points here. I'm going to add a point right there, and then some points below it. And notice when I add some points, it kind of moves things around. That's, again, this little lack of precision. It's this top point right there that I want to pull down without affecting things below it. That's why I added 3 points to keep them from moving. So I take this top point, which will affect these guys right there. I can pull them down so we're not too bright. Now, this really isn't a problem if you're putting this on the web, but if you're putting this on analog TV, that might cause kind of a buzz inside the image. So I'm going to pull this thing down now to adjust these guys only. Watch them move, and nothing else will move here, basically. Pull them down. There you go. We can take those bright lights and bring them down to about 100 IRE, and now they're not going to cause problems for analog TVs there. Let's move a little bit farther here. We have the same kind of a situation, but on a smaller scale. We've got a little bit of highlights right there. We can adjust them too, but it's a little bit harder to get those guys because we don't want to affect these things that are close to it, those highlights that are close. So it's trickier to do that, but I'll try it again. I'll click here and add 3 points. Trying to keep everything more or less the same. Then take this top point and pull it down. And there we go. But notice that I am affecting other highlights here. It's hard to get just those guys selected. At least it's pretty precise, much more precise than you can do if you work with the numeric values in the slider controls. Okay? And then finally, we're going to kind of work in opposite directions here. Most times you want to increase contrast, but when you have fog, We have things that are pretty close to black here, and things pretty close to white. We could increase the contrast by adding 2 points here, making the highlights a little bit brighter, the dark areas a little bit darker. I'm going to take the dark areas and make them a little bit brighter. And I'll take the bright areas and make them a little bit darker. And that actually takes the curve and flattens it out a bit, so it's not as steep, so there's less contrast now. And now we have mist appearing in front of these trees, whereas before they were darker and looking more prominent. If I turn this off for a second, there's the before, there's the after, as if we have more fog there in front. So sometimes you want to reduce the contrast rather than increase it when you're working with fog. So I think you can see that the Luma curve effect is pretty intuitive when you're adjusting things like the shadows and the highlights. It also gives you plenty of options when you're working with contrast and fixing specific tonality areas within a clip.